رقعة الاحتجاجات اتسعت من بغداد.
Peaceful demonstrations grew increasingly violent as protesters clashed with security forces.
More than 100 are confirmed to have died in the 5 days of protests. But charities and human rights agencies say the actual figure is higher.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories that we're covering this week. Unrest in Iraq, a conflict that is beyond sectarian, and news outlets have been attacked for trying to tell the story. She should have just let it go. The American comedian who tried to justify her friendship with George W. Bush only to see her efforts backfire online. A sibling journalistic rivalry in Poland. Two brothers and the two opposing media organizations under their command. And finding a meditative way through the news.
So umbrellas up, nice and peaceful. It's important not to push too far or you might pull a Tiananmen Square.
Hong Kong yoga coming to a mat near you. The protests started small but escalated quickly. Social media can have that effect. Then came the security crackdown across Iraq, including the use of live ammunition. More than 100 protesters have been killed, as many as 6,000 wounded, and a number of news outlets have been attacked. Since the U.S.-led invasion in 2003, journalists have usually attributed unrest on the streets of Iraq to sectarianism, the divide between primarily Shia and Sunni Muslims. They can't do that this time. Iraqi protesters are demanding an overhaul of the political system, a system known as muhassasa ta'ifiyya, which has played on sectarian divides to carve up the spoils of war-torn but oil-rich Iraq so that most of the wealth gets circulated amongst the political elite and not nearly enough trickles down to ordinary Iraqis. That's what these demonstrations have been about. And given the scale of the protests, it's no wonder that politicians, the security forces they control, and the media outlets they own are closing ranks to protect the status quo. Our starting point this week is Baghdad. Why would Iraqi protesters out to change a political system that works for the few and not the many? Protesters determined to have their movement covered turn to a comedy program rather than a news broadcast to tell their story. Why would they send the videos they captured of the demonstrations and the deadly security response to the Al-Bashir Show, a comedy program airing on German broadcaster Deutsche Welle's Arabic service, and not, for instance, to al-Iraqiyya, their own publicly funded national broadcaster? They were not looking for comedy relief. They were looking for fair coverage of a story that is no laughing matter.
The al-Bashir
Show is a platform for the Iraqi people. He is always addressing their concerns, and especially at a time when Iraqi channels have been prohibited from showing the reality of Iraq, from showing the protests. His coverage has been crucial.
He was dedicating that episode of Al-Bashir Show to footage from the protesters. That this time, instead of people listening to him, it was going to be Al-Bashir Show listening to the people on the street.
بس الشباب كان صوتهم أعلى من صوت الطلقات وأعلى من صوت انفجار قنابل الدخان وأعلى من كل الخضرائيين وقنواتهم الفضائية.
And his biggest criticism is, where is our media? Why are they showing cartoons? Why are they showing cooking shows? I mean, this is probably one of the biggest moments in post-2003 Iraq, and the mainstream media isn't really covering it. His point was, we don't have a free and fair media, mainstream media, in our country.
That was made evident by the coverage of the demonstrations. More than 100 have been killed, thousands more wounded, but from the outset, most mainstream media outlets in Iraq tried to ignore the story. Not just al-Iraqiyya, privately owned channels as well. By day 2 of the protests, police were firing live ammunition into the crowds. Iraqi television reporters started covering the story, but in many cases, they downplayed it.
لم يحصل أي شيء سوى هناك أضرار مادية قريبة من هذه المحال التجارية في ساحة التحرير.
On day 3 came the internet shutdown, affecting 75% of the country. Some news outlets based outside Baghdad that were covering the story would pay the price. On day 5, masked men converged on the Saudi-owned Al-Arabiya and the Kurdistan-based NRT Arabic, among others, ransacking their buildings, sending the channels a clear message.
So shutting down the internet was effective in reducing the ability of the protesters to coordinate, but shutting down the TV stations was part of a media blackout. The Iraqi government was probably up to no good. Violence was going to erupt. The heavy-handed approach was going to become worse. And having live media coverage was not going to go down well.
And so what the militias and government were trying to do was completely isolate Iraq from the world. These channels were covering events daily and from every province, and that's why they were targeted, because they were trying to give people a voice to speak out.
Unlike most of the popular unrest in Iraq's post-war era, the issues at the core of these protests are not primarily sectarian. They are systemic, with sectarian undertones. Iraq is not a poor country. It just feels like one. Despite more than $100 billion a year worth of oil exports, roughly 20% of Iraqis still lack a safe water supply. Many blame a system known as muhassasa ta'ifiyya, which translates to sectarian apportionment and amounts to a form of ethno-sectarian balancing. Under muhassasa, Iraqi coalition governments hand out ministerial and government positions according to the percentage of the population that is Shia, Sunni, and Kurdish. They apportion budgetary spending on that basis as well. And while that approach sounds demographically defensible, in practice it has resulted in endemic corruption and a failure of the country's oil wealth benefiting ordinary Iraqis.
We have political parties. What they have managed to do is make sure that they have the wherewithals, the tools, and the resources to keep winning elections. Those tools are the following. A, winning government office and the wealth that the government offices have, and using that to reward their supporters. You also need public opinion. These political parties have their own TV or newspaper or radio outlets, then broadcast their message, because that loyal base requires constant messaging in order to keep them activated and keep them voting for the next round of elections.
The muhassasa system allows politicians it masks corruption in government, basically. There is no political will in Iraq for an independent media, because what an independent media will do is expose corruption on a grand scale. But it'll also give voice to marginalized groups in Iraq who haven't necessarily been given a platform that might call to question the current political system.
Throughout the country, Iraqis feel the political process doesn't represent their voice. They feel that the mainstream media doesn't really represent their voice. The conventional news channels are linked to political parties. Now, those political parties are facing an existential threat. These protests are saying down with the system and down with all of the parties, not one party, all of them. So, of course, they won't want to cover the extent of which these citizens of Iraq have grievances.
Until 2003 and the fall of Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi media landscape was barren, consisting of just one TV channel, 4 radio stations, and 5 newspapers, all state-controlled. Satellite dishes were illegal. As the country transitioned out of the Hussein era, dozens of new broadcast outlets went on the air that the US-led coalition authorities said would safeguard the country's new democracy. All it took to acquire a license to broadcast was the money to buy one. But very few Iraqis could afford one. Those who could tended to come with political connections. A decade and a half later, what has resulted is a new landscape. Politically partisan proprietors and channels more devoted to their owners' interests than those of their viewers.
Because it's partisan, if there is a problem that doesn't have a partisan nature, then the system fails, kind of doesn't know how to handle it. Unlike previous protests against sectarian political parties, which, these media outlets are made and designed to cover, because you can just take sides. This is the protest of a majority Shia youth against a majority Shia-led government. So they didn't know what to do, so they decided just not to cover it. So in a way, the system failed, like system error.
Which explains why, when Iraqis took to the streets, they bypassed their own domestic media outlets and looked for help elsewhere. Is there any wonder that young Iraqis, when they chose to send their videos out for the world to see, that they chose a comedian working for a German broadcaster broadcasting in Arabic, as opposed to sending those videos to Iraqi journalists at Iraqi television channels?
It's not surprising at all, actually. The Iraqis have seen how politically affiliated their media are. And as they don't want to be associated with any particular side at the moment, these protesters are very keen to get across the fact they have no political affiliations. Ahmed al-Bashir, who is Iraqi, and Deutsche Welle, who are an independent international station, are the best option.
We're discussing other media stories that are on our radar this week with one of our producers, Meenakshi Ravi. Meena, sticking with the Iraq war for a moment, but the American side of that story. The president who started that war, George W. Bush, made some news this past week alongside a television comedian. Walk us through that story.
So the story began, Richard, last Sunday at, of all places, a game of American football in Dallas, Texas. The talk show host in question, Ellen DeGeneres, a gay liberal comedian, and she was photographed sitting alongside George W. Bush at the game. The reaction was immediate. A lot of her fans were really disapproving of the company she was keeping. Remember, George W. Bush started the war in Iraq in 2003 over non-existent weapons of mass destruction, and it caused the deaths of at least 500,000 Iraqis, and many legal experts say he should be tried as a war criminal.
So DeGeneres then goes on camera filming her response to her critics. Were they buying the explanations she was offering?
There were some who were willing to accept what she said, but by and large, it did not go down well. Here's a clip of what she said.
Here's the thing. I'm friends with George Bush. In fact, I'm friends with a lot of people who don't share the same beliefs that I have. We're all different, and I think that we've forgotten that that's okay, that we're all different.
That segment went viral, hitting 20 million views and going on for 500,000 likes on Twitter. However, it also amplified the criticisms. And one of the most cutting pieces of critique was actually unspoken. It came from an activist in New York City called Raphael Shimunov. And he decided to re-edit DeGeneres' video, adding some images in, disturbing ones, showing the actual consequences of George W. Bush's war.
For instance, I wish people wouldn't wear fur. I don't like it, but I'm friends with people who wear fur. And I'm friends with people who are furry, as a matter of fact. I have friends who should tweeze more.
That video has now also gone viral, despite the best efforts of Ellen DeGeneres' producers, who tried to have it taken offline, claiming copyright infringement. We spoke with Raphael Shimunov, the producer of that video.
So I objected to Ellen's video response because she really didn't respond. She made it look like people are just upset that a liberal person is sitting with a conservative. In my research to find the images to lay in the background, I had to actually censor myself. And that was because the images I found were too horrific. What she did there was erase Iraqis, and what I did with the video edit was reintroduce Iraqis.
He definitely did bring the Iraqis back into focus, the victims of that war, Richard. This was the image from that video. It was shared all across social media.
Okay, thanks, Meena. We're turning now to Poland as the country heads into its parliamentary elections. The populist Law and Justice Party, known as PiS, is hoping for re-election, and amongst the tools at its disposal to secure victory is the public broadcaster, Telewizja Polska, or TVP. The head of TVP is named Jacek Kurski. He is beyond loyal to the ruling party. Before getting that job almost 4 years ago, Kurski was a deputy minister in the PiS government. He has made sweeping changes at TVP, turning it into a propaganda machine that his political masters now rely on. But he's not the only Kurski in the media business in Poland. His older brother, Jarosław, effectively runs the country's biggest opposition newspaper, Gazeta Wyborcza. Think Family Feud, only one with a few political and media angles to it. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on how the story of two brothers and the media outlets they run reflects a deeply divided country.
9 months ago, Paweł Adamowicz, the longtime mayor of the Polish port city of Gdansk, was stabbed to death at a charity concert.
The mayor of the Polish city of Gdansk has been stabbed.
His attacker, a mentally unstable man, had just been released from prison, a prison where some say he was exposed to hour after hour of television that for months dwelt on an ongoing investigation into the mayor's personal finances.
To zachowanie tego człowieka, który siedział w więzieniu i był indoktrynowany reżimową telewizją, on był takim jakby owocem tej nienawiści sianej po prostu.
That's the mayor's widow. The regime TV she's talking about is the taxpayer-funded public broadcaster, Telewizja Polska, TVP. She says its output influenced the killer.
W 2018 roku Telewizja Polska.
In 2018, Telewizja Polska talked about Paweł Adamowicz almost 1,800 times. That's about 5 pieces a day on average.
Dlaczego prosił pan przestępców o pieniądze na film Andrzeja Wajdy?
I don't recall any level-headed accounts of the investigations into his finances. If you regularly watch TVP, you could easily have come to the conclusion that he represented a great danger to Poland.
Mógł nabrać przekonania, że to jest człowiek bardzo groźny dla Polski.
The coverage of Paweł Adamowicz is just one of the many stories that critics say reflect badly on TVP, especially its main news programme, watched by more than 2 million people every day, even more in election season, which is exactly where Poland is now, between European elections 5 months ago and parliamentary elections this weekend.
A wybory 13 października są najważniejsze, bo zdecydują o przyszłości Polski.
The stories on TVP may change. The tone and its reflection of Law and Justice Party policy does not.
One mają swój stały schemat.
They have a pattern. In the beginning, we usually have information about the government's biggest achievement of the day.
$1 bilion przeznaczonych na inwestycje już pracuje w gospodarce. Efekty są widoczne.
Then we hear about the opposition that is absolutely helpless and cannot match the government's great success.
Tymczasem z programów partii opozycyjnych, które mogłyby tworzyć rząd, wyłania się chaos.
Those stories are supported by images from their time in office, hammering home how terrible life was back then.
W trakcie kampanii wyborczej do Parlamentu Europejskiego,
During the European parliamentary election campaign in May, TVP concentrated on the government most of the time, always in a very positive light. On the other hand, anytime the opposition was shown, it was always in a negative way. Either they were shown as some sort of a comical, helpless group,
Niecodzienne zachowanie byłej premier,
or they recalled all the scandals from their time in government.
skandale, afery z poprzednich rządów.
To jest jakby aparat propagandy.
It's a propaganda tool that works on a very simple basis. Lie, lie, continue to repeat the lie, and you will make it stick. I regret to tell you all this, and I'm torn about how much I should say. And you know the reason why this is so difficult for me, because the head of this television is my brother.
Że szefem tej telewizji jest mój brat.
You heard that right. Jarosław Kirksey, the de facto editor-in-chief of Gazeta Wyborcza, Poland's biggest liberal newspaper, has a brother, Jacek, who just happens to run TVP. Two brothers who used to play on the same team, now on opposite sides.
It all started here in Gdansk, where the Kirksey Brothers were born and raised. This is also the home to this now iconic shipyard, the birthplace of Solidarity, a movement that helped to topple communism and change the face of Poland. Both brothers were heavily involved in Solidarity. Jarosław Kirksey founded a clandestine anti-communist student newspaper. Jacek went on to edit it. Back then, they were both on the same side of the political and media divide. But in a new Poland, a post-communist one, they soon went their separate ways.
Jarosław joined Gazeta Wyborcza, which represents strong liberal democratic views with slight leftist characteristics. Jacek, however, from the start was clearly a right-wing conservative. For a long time, the Kirksey brothers remained on good terms. It all started to go wrong about 2005, when the Law and Justice Party gained power for the first time. The conflict was radicalized, and it spiraled out of control.
Już tak funkcjonuje na zasadzie samonakręcającej się spirali.
Fast forward to 2016, just months after the Law and Justice Party returned to power, and Jacek, then a deputy culture minister, was appointed as the new head of TVP.
Jestem gwarantem tego, że będę umiał uchronić niezależność i wolność telewizji publicznej od zagrożeń ze świata polityki.
We've tried to talk to Jacek Kirksey directly. We first requested an interview with him months ago, and initially it looked as though he might agree. But just before we arrived here in Warsaw, we were told he's too busy. So we're on our way to TVP now to give it one last shot.
Our producer was put through to Kirksey's personal assistant.
Dziękuję, do widzenia.
But she politely reiterated her boss didn't have time to meet with us.
Kirksey purged hundreds of journalists from TVP, replacing them with reporters more loyal to the government, a public broadcaster closely aligned with one party, the Law and Justice Party, and its news coverage reflects that, a propaganda machine operating at taxpayers' expense.
The changes Jacek Kirksey made have raised concerns in Brussels, where the EU has accused Poland of turning toward authoritarian politics. We did manage to put these concerns to someone from TVP, Krzysztof Skowronski, president of the Polish Journalists Association and the host of a show on the network. He explained that moving TVP to the right was the only fair way to balance out the media market in Poland.
Before 2016, the media in Poland, including TVP, were dominated by the left. After the Law and Justice Party victory, TVP started to speak the language of the victors. They reported the world from their point of view, from a conservative perspective. Yes, TVP has moved too far towards government propaganda. Yes, public TV should be in the center, but then there would be nothing on the right, and we'd have asymmetry again.
Nie ma niczego po prawej stronie, tak? I znowu sytuacja staje się asymetryczna.
The left-wing space is firmly occupied by Jarosław's Gazeta Wyborcza. The newspaper was founded 30 years ago in close alignment with the Solidarity movement. Nowadays, it's regarded as being in opposition to the current government. Scandals and alleged malpractice or misconduct by the Law and Justice Party dominate its pages. And in the run-up to this election, week after week, Wyborcza has published damning indictments of the party's 4 years in office, supplements they've called the Black Book of Peace.
It's completely critical towards the government, regardless of what the government does. What's more, they don't just support the opposition, but for many years, they've embodied it. Jarosław Kurski is an active politician who speaks at political rallies.
Dzisiaj przyszli po media publiczne, jutro chcą przyjść po media prywatne. Nie pozwolimy im!
He's crossed the line as a journalist.
We at Gazeta Wyborcza do not see ourselves only as journalists. We are also conscious citizens. Please remember, these are not normal times. Let me give you an example. After the victory of the Law and Justice Party, a huge group of their supporters, led by a Catholic priest, came to the headquarters of Gazeta Wyborcza and performed an exorcism on us. They accused us of promoting multi-culti, of bringing Muslim terrorists to Poland, of lacking morality, of being evil. The government wants to destroy us, but it's very intelligent. It is not a face-to-face attack or an attempt at censorship. They hope to kill us financially. They put a plastic bag over our head and say, try to breathe.
In many ways, the tale of the Kirksey brothers and their respective media outlets provides a snapshot, a telling one, of Polish politics today. And wherever this story goes, it's going to be told in more ways than one.
And finally, earlier this year, we ran a video that was produced to help get Britain through its period of political turmoil. It was called Brexit Yoga, a form of online therapy that, as its Australian inventor, the ABC network's Sammy J, put it, tackles the big issues of the day, then submits them to a variety of sporting analogies and yoga poses. The idea is to get everyone to just relax and breathe. Well, Mr. J has since turned his attention to Hong Kong and the political demonstrations that are now into their 7th month. Not that the British get a pass on this. He's thrown in a little colonial history as well, just for context. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
Okay, we're going to warm up with our first position, the Union Jack. So feel those colonial powers inside you, really impose your culture. And after holding this position for over a century, we'll head into our 1997 handover. So lowering the Union Jack now, feel that global empire miserably shuddering to an end. And from here we'll transition awkwardly into our one country, two systems. Okay, you might be feeling a bit uncomfortable now, so it's time to stand up for your rights with a mass protest. So umbrellas up, nice and peaceful. It's important not to push too far or you might pull a Tiananmen Square. And when you're feeling confident, we'll move into shutting down the airport, and from here into our flaming barricade. Well done.